Welcome to Timing Attacks Have Never Been So Practical. Advanced Cross-Site Search Attacks. This is personally one of my favorite talks of the day, so you are in for a real treat. With our featured speaker today, his name is Nathaniel Galanter. And before we begin, just a couple notes. You should stop by the business hall located in Bayside, AB. If you have a chance, the Black Hat Arsenal is in the Palm Foyer on level 3. And the Arsenal reception is happening right after this talk at 5 p.m. So if you want to go to the reception, there'll be food and drinks. If you haven't picked any merchandise, there will be T-shirts and books selling at the bookstore, the Black Hat bookstore. And if you go before they close, they usually have some pretty good offers. So you should check it out. It'll be discounted. You can visit the Kali Linux lab in the Mandalay Bay A. And last but not least, if you could, please put your phone in silence mode. We would appreciate that. So without anything else, please give a warm welcome to our speaker today. Again, Nathaniel Galanter. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Nathaniel Galanter, and I'm really glad to be here and to give you my talk about advanced cross-site search attacks that are practical timing side channel attacks on web applications. I will explain about the attacks and show you how they can be used to extract sensitive information from many websites, include very popular ones. For example, I will demonstrate most of the attacks in this talk on Gmail. Before I begin, a little about myself. I'm a security researcher from Israel. Recently, I founded a company called CyberPion, pioneers in cybersecurity, and beyond consulting services, we explore new attack vectors, mainly on web applications, and develop countermeasures against some of these attacks. I'm also in the academy. I'm leading the cybersecurity studies and research in the College of Management Academic Studies. So the agenda for this talk, I will begin with background about cross-site search attacks and with special focus on the response inflation technique. Then I will present the challenges of this talk and will offer two new attack vectors, browser-based cross-site search attacks and second-order cross-site search attacks. So let's begin with the background. Last October in the CCS conference, I introduced cross-site search attacks in a joint work with Professor Amir Herzberg from Bar-Ilan University. And cross-site search attacks exploit leakage of information via the timing side channel in the search process of web applications. Generally, it is possible to extract almost everything that can be searched. The attack is practical. We evaluated it on hundreds of Gmail users with great results. For example, we created a demo of the original attack, and this demo extracted the first and the last names of Gmail users out of a large dictionary of 2,000 names. The adversary model for cross-site search attacks is the classical cross-site adversary model used in many other attacks. Cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, clickjacking, and other attacks. And in this adversary model, the browser of the victim is authenticated to the attacked website. In this example, and in most of the examples in this talk, it is going to be Gmail. And using the same browser, the victim surfs to the attacking page, and once the browser of the victim loads the attacking page sends requests in the name of the victim to the attacked website. So the requests that are sent from the attacking page to the attacked website are the cross-site requests. In cross-site search attacks, the cross-site requests are actually search requests. So the attacker sends from the attacking page search requests in the name of the victim to Gmail. Now, although the attacker can send search requests in the name of the victim, the attacker cannot access the content of the responses, and this is due to the same origin policy. However, the attacker can still measure the response time, the time since the request was sent until the response arrives. And in cross-site search attacks, the attacker just relies on the response time to extract very sensitive information. Let's examine a scenario that will give you, I believe, good intuition about the idea behind the attack. And in this example, the goal of the attacker is to detect whether the name of the victim, a visitor of the attacking page, is either Alice or Bob. So once the victim surfs to the attacking page sends two search requests in the name of the victim to Gmail. The first search request asks for all the emails in the sent items folder that were sent from Bob. The second search request asks for all the emails in the sent items folder that were sent from Alice. Now, we know that the sent items folder contains only messages that were sent by the true user. And in this example, this is Alice. Therefore, we know that the response for the first search request is going to be an empty response. On the other hand, we expect that the response for the second search request will contain many messages, many emails that were sent by Alice. And the idea behind cross-site search attacks is that just like the size difference and the content difference of the responses, there will be also a difference in the response time. So what else can be extracted using cross-site search attacks? So in addition to the name of the victim, it is possible to extract information about the contacts of the victim, information about relationships of the victim, to extract search history, email content, and even very sensitive information that usually appear in fixed structures. For example, credit card numbers and phone numbers that usually appear in short digit sequences. Let's go through the basic flow of the original cross-site search attack. And the basic flow comes to answer a Boolean question. It has 3 steps. In the first step of the basic flow, the attacker transforms the Boolean question into a challenge search request. In the second step, the attacker collects response time measurements. And in the third and last step of the attacker analyzes the response time measurements collected at a previous step and draw a conclusion about the answer for the Boolean question. So in the first step, the attacker transforms the Boolean question into a challenge search request. We already saw an example to a challenge search request that can be used to detect whether the name of the victim is Alice. Similarly, the attacker can test whether the victim is related to Bob by searching whether the Gmail address of Bob appears in at least 100 Gmail conversations. The attacker can test whether Alice has an affair with Charlie by searching whether Alice sent "I love you" to Charlie. Okay? So this is the idea. And in the second step, the attacker collects the response time measurements. First, the attacker sends the challenge search request from the first step and measures its response time. And this is actually the most important point of the attack, so listen well. The goal of the attacker in the entire attack is to detect whether the response for the challenge search request is either a full response that contains at least one entry, or an empty response. And the attacker has to compare the response time of the challenge search request to something. So the attacker sends additional search requests, which I call a dummy search request. And the dummy search request is just like the challenge search request, but with a little modification that makes it yield an empty response. And in our example, the attacker assumes that the name of the victim is not some long random string, so the attacker sends a dummy search request that asks for all the emails in the sent items folder that were sent by some long random string. And of course, this dummy search request is expected to yield an empty response. Now the attacker repeats this process of sending challenge and dummy search requests, and in the end of the second step, the attacker has 2 samples of response time. The first for dummy search request and the second for challenge search request. In the third step of the attacker applies statistical test on both these samples, and the goal of this statistical test is to detect whether there is significant difference between the distributions of these samples. If there is a significant difference in the distributions, the attacker concludes that just like the difference in the response time, there is also difference in the content of the responses. And because the dummy search request is assumed to yield an empty response, the attacker concludes that the challenge search request yields a full response. And this means that Alice is the name of the victim. If there is no significant difference between the distributions, this means that just like the dummy search request, the challenge search request also yields an empty response. Let's talk about the challenges of practical timing attacks. First of all, we have the classical challenge of every timing attack, practical or not. And the challenge is the high variance in the measurements. And in particular, the response time measurements are affected by dynamically changing delay in the network, in the server, and even in the computer of the victim. And so this is a classical challenge. And if we want practical attack, we have the challenges of practical attack. So the attacker has to complete the attack in a very short time, and this is very important, especially in cross-site attacks, because the attacker would like to complete the attack also during short visits of victims in the attacking page. The attacker would also like to minimize the number of requests that are sent to the server to avoid being detected and blocked by the server. A great solution that we offered in our original work about cross-site search attack was the response inflation technique. And response inflation is a technique that increases the size difference between full responses and empty responses. And the idea is that the larger the size difference is, the larger the response time is. Response inflation allows the attacker to transform the problem from a challenge of increasing the response time difference to a challenge of increasing the response size difference. And response inflation relies on the following observation. Search requests usually contain many parameters, and some of these parameters are reflected in the response as a function of the number of entries in the response. So in empty response, the reflected parameters will not appear at all or only a few times, and in full responses, the reflected parameters will appear many times. Yet it is not enough. As you can see, the size difference is not significant, but if the attacker can send long strings, very long strings, as the reflected parameters, the size difference becomes very significant. And we found that in some cases, the attacker can send as the values of the reflected parameters very long strings, thousands of bytes. So this is the response inflation. It is a very effective technique. And for example, we evaluated this attack on Gmail on the HTML view. And in the HTML view of Gmail, the query itself is reflected once for every entry in the response. By default, there are up to 50 entries for the search, and each query can be inflated up to 8 kilobytes. And this can be done simply by concatenating the OR operator to the query with a very long string. So together, this means that we can inflate the size difference between full and empty responses to something like 400 kilobytes, which is very significant. So response inflation is really great, but it seems that, at least in some cases, the party is over. For example, Gmail just blocked the option to send cross-site search requests in the HTML view, so we can't just use the response inflation technique on Gmail, which is pretty bad. And the challenge of this talk is, what can attackers do when the original cross-site search attacks using response inflation are impossible? What can the attacker do when we can't use the original attack? And in this talk, I would like to offer two new attack vectors. And the first is browser-based cross-site search. And browser-based cross-site search attacks can be used when there is some difference between full and empty responses, although not as significant as in the original attack with response inflation. The second new attack vector is second-order cross-site search attacks. And this family of attacks can be used when there is no size difference or when the size difference is negligible. So I will begin with browser-based cross-site search attacks. And browser-based cross-site search attacks rely on two previous works and on algorithmic improvements. And the first work is the original work about cross-site search attacks. The second work is the work of Tom van Gotham et al. Tom is also a speaker here. And also from the last CCS conference about browser-based timing side channel attacks. To explain what is browser-based timing side channel attack, I will compare browser-based timing attacks to classical timing attacks. In classical timing attacks, the attacker sends the same request again and again to the server to collect response time measurements. In browser-based timing attacks, the attacking page, remember that we talk about the cross-site adversary model, so the attacking page sends every unique request only once to the server. Then the attacking page, who cannot access the content of the response, the attacking page caches that response, for example, using the service worker feature. And then the attacker collects response time measurements by reloading the cached response from the cache. So instead of reloading the same request many times from the server, we reload it many times from the browser cache, for example. Classical timing attacks exploit, but are also affected by the delay in the network, in the server, and on the computer of the victim. Browser-based timing attacks are affected and exploit only the browser processing time. Therefore, classical timing attacks can be used to differentiate between small and large resources, but also to distinguish between two cases where the responses are even identical, but the processing time in the server is different. On the other hand, browser-based timing attacks can be used only to differentiate between small and large resources. So now we can go through the basic flow of browser-based cross-site search attacks. And the basic flow of browser-based cross-site search attacks is just like the basic flow of the original attack. It has 3 steps. It comes to answer a Boolean question. And actually, the difference is only in the second step, in the way the attacker collects the response time measurements. So first, the attacker transforms the Boolean question into a challenge search request. And then the attacker collects response time measurements. First, the attacker sends the challenge search request and caches its response. The attacker also sends a dummy search request, which is expected to yield an empty response, and caches the response for that request as well. And now the attacker collects response time measurements by reloading the cached responses many times. Notice that the response time difference between full and empty responses in browser-based attack is smaller compared to the original attack using response inflation. However, the attacker can compensate on the smaller response time difference by increasing the sample size. The attacker can take many more measurements, and this is because it takes only a few milliseconds to reload a resource from the cache compared to hundreds of milliseconds when the attacker has to do this from the server. So the attacker collects response time measurements, and just like the original cross-site search attack, in the third step, the attacker will analyze the samples collected and will draw a conclusion about the answer for the Boolean question. So algorithmic improvements. This will be I will demonstrate only one algorithmic improvement. And the algorithmic improvements are irrelevant for the basic flow. And they come to deal with the more complex case of answering multiple choice questions. So instead of answering questions like, is the name of the victim Alice, the attacker has a large dictionary of names. And he would like to learn which of the names in the dictionary, a few or none, match the victim. Generally, all the algorithmic improvements I applied are adjustment or extensions of algorithms that were used in the original work to optimally use the browser-based timing side channel. I will present one very simple optimization, but first I will explain how I evaluate browser-based cross-site search attacks. So I evaluated browser-based cross-site search attacks compared to the 2 previous works I mentioned. And I repeated attacks that were done in each of the works. I repeated the attack to extract the first and the last names of Gmail users, as done in the original work about cross-site search attacks, and repeated also the attack done by Van Gotham et al. To extract the age of Facebook user. In both the attacks, browser-based cross-site search attacks achieved significant improvements. In this talk, due to lack of time and because I have much cooler demo to show you, I will present only one example. And this example is going to be the Gmail example. So in this example, the goal of the attacker is to extract the first and the last names of Gmail user out of a list of 2,000 names. The original attack, as I said, succeeded to do this in 1 minute and 90% success rate, which is good. And also in the original work, we did not follow the naive approach. We did not just ask, are you Alice, are you Bob, are you Charlie, are you David 2,000 times? And instead of that, we developed divide and conquer algorithms. And in particular, we used the optimized multiple term identification algorithm, OMTI. And this algorithm uses the OR operator to ask questions like, is the name of the victim Alice or Bob or Charlie or David, up to the length limit of the search request. And in each of the rounds of the algorithm, the attacker sends several challenge search requests. Each of them asks about set of values. The attacker analyzes the response time for the challenge search requests compared to each other and compared to a dummy search request, which is changing between the rounds of the algorithm. And the algorithm continues recursively with the challenge search request that yielded a full response. when we rely on the browser-based timing side channel rather than the classical timing side channel, we can further optimize this algorithm. And a simple optimization relies on the observation that we are no longer affected by the browser processing time. And because dummy search requests, although they have different processing time in the server, but the response for all the dummy search requests are just empty responses, and the size of empty responses is very similar, we can, instead of sending dummy search requests in each of the rounds of the algorithm, we can just send the dummy search request in the first round to take response time measurements and to use the response time measurements from the first round in each of the other rounds. And by applying this simple optimization, browser-based cross-site search attacks succeeded to improve the accuracy and to decrease the time to less than 42 seconds. I will show you a video demo of this attack because it is now blocked by Google. So this is the demo. So this demo will also give you better intuition, better understanding about the way the OMT algorithm works. So you can see that this set of 2,000 names is divided into 3 subsets in this case. And there are challenge search requests that are sent in each of the rounds. You can also see that in each of the rounds, the size of this subset is cut by half. You can already see the names in the dictionary were alphabetically sorted, so you can see the N and the G of my name, I think. And within 40 seconds on average, I think in this example, the attacking page outputs my name. So this is a demo. And Gmail already blocked also cross-site search requests in the standard view, so it is no longer possible to launch this attack. I launched this attack on the standard view after Gmail applied countermeasures and blocked the use of response inflation in the HTML view. So browser-based cross-site search attacks are really great, but there are still cases where they cannot be used. And we need to deal also with such cases. And for example, if I want to attack some Gmail account and I want to detect whether a particular term appears in this account and this term appears only once in the account, so the size difference between empty response and a full response that contains only a single entry of this term, the size difference will be too small, and I will not be able to use browser-based cross-site search attacks effectively. So we need something else, and therefore I offer second-order cross-site search attacks. And generally, second-order attacks, second-order cross-site scripting, second-order denial of service, and other second-order attacks have 2 steps. In the first step of second-order attacks, the attacker manipulates the account and makes it vulnerable. And in the second step, the attacker just exploits the vulnerability. In second-order cross-site search attacks, in the manipulation, the first step of the attack, the attacker manipulates the account and creates a response inflation effect. And then, in the second step, the attacker can just effectively launch a browser-based or the original cross-site search attack. In this talk, I will present 2 second-order cross-site search attacks. The first is the simple one, and the second is more sophisticated, the inflating second-order cross-site search attacks. So let's define the model of this attack. So we talk about a storage, and this storage contains many records, and the attacker is interested in the value of some secret that appears only once in one of the records. We have another assumption, which maybe seems very strong, but it is a very practical assumption, and the assumption is that the attacker can manipulate the attacked storage remotely. But I will show you that this is really practical attack because take, for example, email account. Everyone can manipulate email account remotely. You can just send an email to the attacked account, and then you manipulate it remotely. So toward the end of this talk, I will show you another service that can be manipulated remotely. But right now, let's focus on email accounts. So the simple attack. The problem is simple. What is our problem? The secret appears only once in the attacked storage. So we have a simple solution to this problem. The attacker will add to the attacked storage many records that will contain the secret. Okay? Okay, I see that it is not okay, and it's good. This is indeed a very strange situation. The attacker doesn't know what the secret is, and I say that the attacker will overcome the challenge of by adding records to the storage that will contain the unknown secret. Okay, and remember, the challenge of the attacker is to detect what the secret is. So how could it be? I will show you an example that will show that sometimes it is indeed possible. And in this example, the goal of the attacker is to extract the Facebook password reset code of the victim, who also has a Yahoo email account. So this is the flow of the attack. This is a cross-site attack. The victim serves to the attacking page. And we have another assumption. The attacker knows the Yahoo email address of the victim. The attacker can either launch an attack to get the Yahoo email address, or just to launch a targeted attack on someone with known Yahoo email address. And then the attacker initiates password reset process in Facebook using the Yahoo email address of the victim. And this tricks Facebook to send to the Yahoo email account of the victim an email with 6-digit password reset code. Now, the attacker can repeat this process several times. And in the Facebook example, when I tested it, I was able to repeat this process 15 times. And of course, Facebook sent the same code every time. So now the secret appears 15 times in the account, and the attacker can launch a cross-site search attack and to extract the 6-digit password reset code. So this was the simple attack, and it is very nice, but as you could see, it is very limited. We can't inflate the size difference between full and empty responses as we wish. And therefore, I'm happy to introduce the inflating second-order cross-site search attack, which is pretty cool attack. You will see. I hope you will enjoy it. And this attack creates significant response inflation effect. But unlike every other attack you have seen so far, in the inflating second-order cross-site search attack, the empty response is going to be significantly larger than the full response. Let's extend our model. So first of all, the goal of the attacker is to detect the value of some secret, and this secret, there is some dictionary of values, thousands of values that can be, one of them is the value of the secret. And the goal of the attacker is to detect the value of the secret. I'm adding 3 notations. M is the maximum number of results in a search response. A match all record is a record that matches all the possible values. It simply contains all the values from the dictionary, and therefore every search request that asks about a set of values from the dictionary, there is possibility that the match all record will appear in the response. And the last notation is inflating record. And the inflating record is a record that significantly increases the size of every response that contains it. Okay? So these are the new notations. And this is the attack process. In the first step of the attack, the manipulation step, the attacker plants 1 match all inflating record in the attacked storage. Then the attacker plants additional m-1 match all records, and then the attacker can wait, and the user may use his account and add records, or the attacker can just do tricks like the Facebook password reset code tricks that I showed you, and there will be another record in the storage that contains our secret, a single record. In the second part of the attack, the attacker will just launch browser-based cross-site search attack and will effectively extract the secret. And now I will explain you why this attack works. So let's examine the storage. At the bottom, we can see the inflating match all record. Above, we have m-1 match all records. And at the top, we have the record with the secret. When the attacker sends a search request that asks for a set of values that at least one of them match the secret, then the response that will be returned will have m entries, and the first entry will be the newest entry, the entry with just the record with the secret. The other m-1 records will be the match all records. On the other end, and of course the size of such response is just normal, okay? This is a normal response. On the other end, if the attacker sends a search request and none of the values, the search request asks for a set of values, and the secret doesn't match any of the values that appear in the search request, then the m results that will be returned in the response will be all the match all records, including the inflating match all record. And in this case, due to the inclusion of the inflating match all record, the size of the response is going to be very large, significantly larger than the normal response. Now I owe you an explanation about how can we create an inflating record. So I found a very simple trick to create an inflating record in email services. This trick was applicable in both Yahoo and Gmail, and I found that there is no reasonable length restriction on the from and the to email fields in emails. So I could just send email, for example, with a from field which contains a half a megabyte string, which is very significant. And the from field specifically is reflected in the search responses. So to create an inflating record in email services, I just sent an email with a very long from field, half a megabyte, for example. And now to my favorite example. Remember at the beginning of this talk, I told you what can be extracted using cross-site search attacks, and I told you that it is possible to extract sensitive information that appears in fixed structures, and I say fixed structures, and I gave as an example credit card numbers. So now it is the time to show you how to extract credit card numbers. And actually I showed you how to do that, you know? I showed you how to extract the first and the last names of Gmail users out of, the two values out of 2,000 options. And to extract Visa or MasterCard credit card numbers, this is not much harder. It is just about extracting 4 values out of 10,000 options. Can you see it? Visa and MasterCard credit card numbers are actually four sequences of 4 digits each. Okay, so the number of options for each 4-digit sequence is 10,000. Okay, so the challenge is to extract 4 values out of 10,000 options. This is not much harder than the demo you already saw. So in this demo, the match all record will be just a record with all the possible values for a 4-digit sequence, 10,000 numbers. The inflating match all record will be just a match all record that was sent to the victim with a very long from field. And I want to demonstrate this attack on Gmail. And the question is, how can I do that? I told you at the beginning of the talk that it is no longer possible to send cross-site search requests in the HTML view of Gmail. Later, I showed you the names attack, and I told you that Gmail also blocked cross-site search requests in the standard view. So how it is possible to launch cross-site search attacks without sending cross-site search requests? This is a significant challenge when we talk about cross-site search attacks. So unfortunately for Google, you can say luckily for me, it is still possible to send requests for autocomplete suggestions in Gmail in a cross-site manner. And as you can see in your Gmail accounts and also on the screen if you don't have Gmail accounts, in the autocomplete suggestions in Gmail, there are up to 4 entries that come from the Gmail account. So this is almost like sending cross-site search request, to send a request for autocomplete suggestions. Let's see how this attack works. So this is our attacked account. Just like the illustration, you can see we have an inflating match all record. Above we have m-1, m is 4, so m-1 is 3. We have m-1 match all records, and we have the new record, the record with the secret. In this example, this is an email that contains a receipt with credit card number. So this is an example to a request for autocomplete suggestion that asks for a set of values that one of them, the 1, 2, 3, 4, is part of the credit card number. And in the response, you can see that the first record is the record with the secret, the record with the credit card number. The other n-1 records are the match-all records. The size of this response is normal. On the other end, if the attacker sends a search request, a request for autocomplete suggestion, for a set of values that none of them is part of the credit card number, then in this case, we have only match-all records, and we have the n-1 match-all records, and we also have the inflating match-all record. You can see the long from field. So in this case, due to the inclusion of the inflating match-all record, the size of the autocomplete suggestion response will be significantly larger. It will be actually 0.5 megabyte compared to a few kilobytes. So of course, the time difference between both the cases is significant, and the attacker can easily detect this difference. Let's see a video demo of this attack. Of course, I cannot show you real demos of this attack, although there are many websites vulnerable, because we lost the option to get bug bounties. So only videos. And let's see the demo. So this is just the account you saw on the screen in the presentation. And here you can see the inflating match-all record. You can see the long from field. You can see all the possible, all the 10,000 options for a 4-digit sequence. I could add them in an attachment also. Above, you can see the 3 match-all records, and they just contain all the possible values. And at the top, we have the record with the secret. And you can see the credit card number as an attachment. Remember the credit card number because I'm going to extract it. So this is the credit card number. And now let's see how the autocomplete suggestion feature works. So in this demo, you will see how autocomplete suggestions are sent via the graphical user interface. But in the attack, the attacker just sends the same request in a cross-site manner from the attacking page. So you can just see the same requests are sent by the attacker, and this was actually the problem. So when the attacker sends requests for a set of values that none of them is part of the credit card number, you can see that the response that you can see on the UI contains only match-all records, and you can see all of the inflating match-all records that increases the size significantly. However, when the attacker adds to the set of questioned values a number that is part of the credit card number, the 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see that now in the response, instead of the inflating match-all record, we have the record with the secret. So in this case, the size of the response will be smaller. So this is the attack, and this is the attacking page. And actually, from the attacking page, the attack looks very similar to the attack I already showed you, so I will skip. And this is very similar to the OMTI algorithm. Very quickly, the size of the subset is cut by half every round. And in this case, within 50 seconds, the credit card number will appear on screen in the attacking page. So this is very cool to extract 16-digit credit card number in less than a minute. Pretty cool. Thank you. And I evaluated this attack on several Gmail accounts hundreds of times. And this attack succeeded to achieve 96% success rate, which is pretty awesome. And also in the other 4%, relying on the way credit card numbers are chosen, because I detected 3 out of the 4 sequences, I was able to detect the error and to easily extract also the missing 4-digit sequence. As you could see, there is a drawback in the second-order cross-site search attacks I showed you. And the problem is that the victim can see the planted records. We would like to find a way to launch second-order cross-site search attacks without raising suspicion. And of course, this will be an optimal case. And a second-order attack that will not raise suspicion, I will call it a stealthy attack. So in email services, I found a very nice, very simple trick, actually, to launch second-order cross-site search attacks stealthily. And the trick is to abuse anti-spam mechanisms. If the attacker can move the match records and the inflating match records to the spam folder of the victim will not see them. The victim will not get notifications when the emails arrive. So this is great. However, this trick is applicable only in email services like Gmail that support search in the spam folder and in other folders using the same search request. So email services are really great example to services that are vulnerable to second-order cross-site search attacks, but there are also other services. And the last example in this talk will be an example of how to extract search history from search engines. And to extract search history from search engines, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to be able to plant records to the search history logs. And the second challenge is to inject an inflating record. Luckily, the first problem is solved. We showed in previous work that it is possible to easily plant records to the search history logs of Gmail, of Google, Yahoo, Bing, even Facebook. Very easy for a cross-site attacker. And we remain with the challenge of planting an inflating record to the search history logs. And I will show you, I will explain you how to do that in Bing. And in Bing search history, as you can see on the screen, every record in the search history feature is actually a search that was done by the user. And the size of every record is determined by the number of results that the user clicked on them. So I worked hard on Bing, and I found a way to plant a record that represents a search that was done by the user and that the user clicked on hundreds of its results. So of course, this is a very large record. And once we have the option to inject regular records and to inject an inflating record, we can just launch the same inflating second-order cross-site search attack on Bing, just as done in the email case. And of course, this attack is also stealthy because users usually do not visit their search logs. The users usually do not access the search history feature. So 2 slides, and let's talk about defenses very briefly. So if possible, try to block cross-site search requests. If you can't, try to block inflation techniques and apply maybe other restrictions like rate limit or other things. But actually the real challenge is not to block given vulnerability. And this is just like most of the other web applications attack, input validation. The real challenge is to detect all the vulnerable spots. As you could see in the Gmail example, just to block all the cross-site search requests wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. It was possible to launch the same attack by exploiting the autocomplete suggestion feature. So the real challenge is to identify all the vulnerable spots. Conclusions. So I introduced advanced cross-site search attacks, browser-based cross-site search attacks, and second-order cross-site search attacks. I showed you that the attacks are practical. There are here in the audience people from security teams of companies that know that this attack is practical. And there are also many vulnerable websites that are vulnerable. Go to find them. And that's all, generally. Thank you very much for your attention. And I will be glad to take questions here and You can also search my name in the web to find my email and to email me questions. I will be glad to answer. Questions? Yes. Oh, so the question is how, if I understand correctly, how can the attacker make sure that the numbers that he gets in the results are the true numbers? So of course, in the attack, I don't just search for 4-digit numbers. I also ask for terms like Visa or MasterCard, or terms that I know that will appear together with credit card numbers. And yet, there might be a problem if there are several credit card numbers, yeah? But the attacker can overcome them. It's more complicated, but it is possible. The attacker can play with the dates range to filter emails. So there are tricks to do, more complicated.
Question. Oh.
Did Facebook block you yet, or?
Oh, this is a risky question because for sure I reported to Facebook. Okay, be sure. If they blocked or not, and where exactly was the vulnerability?
Fair enough. Thanks.
So my question is, if you this is such a clever attack, if Google wanted to mitigate it, when they send the results, if instead of sending the content in the AJAX request, they send only the subject of the email, as opposed to preloading the whole email body, would that help, or that wouldn't help?
Notice that, okay, the question is, if Google sent only the subject, if it would help. So it depends. For example, in the autocomplete suggestion feature, they don't send the entire email, okay? Yet the from field was reflected. The challenge is you should not answer personalized questions to cross-site search requests. This is the trick, and to avoid all the inflation tricks, you need to just to block them, okay?
This is brilliant. Thank you.
Other questions?
How did you know what the order was of the 4-digit parts of the credit card? In other words, you get 4-digit combinations, but you don't know which one is which.
Oh, this is easy.
You added the pattern.
Credit card numbers
prefix.
have specific structures. For example, in the example I showed you, the first 2 sequences are known, and also their order. And actually, the question is only about the order of the last 2 sequences. This is really easy. I didn't even bother to extract the order, but it is really easy task.
But in general, if it's a longer sequence, it could be more problematic.
Of course, it will be more challenging. It will take more time.
You could build up a prefix. You could do it by building up the prefix of the known prefix, for example.
Yeah. Actually, in my demo, there is an array of known prefixes for credit card numbers, but I don't use it. Okay? I don't need.
Hey, how does the attacker's JavaScript measure response times? Do you have like a blocking XHR or?
Okay, so specifically, first we have the performance API. I didn't use it because I wanted that this demo will work also in browsers in all the browsers and such things. So I just took the time since the response was sent and on error or on load events and such things. So you can just do it in the most basic way you can think about.
Could we have like a browser-based defense where if the browser knows it's a cross-origin request and knows the response will be blocked, just return the XHR immediately?
Okay, so the question is about browser-based defense mechanism to develop browser-based defense that will prevent cross-site attacks by stripping, for example, cookies, it is very problematic because the web is built upon connectivity. You surf to a website, this website sends many requests to other websites to bring images, advertisements, and all these requests, the responses are personalized. So it is pretty hard, I believe. I believe that this attack should be blocked in the web service level. This is what I believe.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you for the great presentation. My question is, can this be mitigated using anti-CSRF tokens?
Can you repeat?
Can this be mitigated by anti-CSRF tokens?
Yes. Of course, anti-CSRF tokens will prevent, if the question was whether anti-CSRF tokens can be used to block the attack, of course, yes. And again, the challenge is not to use anti-CSRF to block cross-site search requests. This is something that should be done, for sure. The challenge is to detect all the interfaces that can be used like search requests. So yes, anti-CSRF is, I believe, the most reasonable countermeasure to use.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.